In my world there is music and good vibes and laughter and lovers, adventure and friendship. We know who we are.
Hello and welcome everybody to Be the Wellness Podcast. Adam and Vanessa Lambert doing the podcast.
Yes, doing the podcast thing.
Indeed.
Doing the podcast dance, I think.
The dance.
The seat dance.
Do you remember back in the day when there was the hamster dance?
Ooh.
That was like a screensaver
No.
for your Windows PC.
No.
And it was like something that you could just send people like in an email or whatever. And if they clicked on it, it would load it into their screensaver. Like,
And it was like a hamster dancing?
dude, it was like a bunch of hamsters, like
I
multiple
kinda
lines
remember
of
this.
dance of hamsters, and like when your screensaver would kick on, they'd all perp, and they're like up on their back legs doing this
I
little
kind of
dance.
do remember this, strangely enough. Like there's something deep in the dark archives of my mind that are like, yes, you remember
You
the
remember
hamster.
the hamster dance? Anyway, it's like that,
It's like that,
but
yeah.
with podcasts.
Not guinea pigs, hamsters. They do seem like they may be akin to each other, but I'm not sure that they actually share any biological similarities.
Yeah, genetic similarities.
Genetic
Yeah.
similarites, yes.
And the biological ones. There's probably
Biologically,
quite a
yes.
few.
Actually, yeah. I
they
know.
have
As soon as that came
hair.
out, I'm like, I think I mean something else.
It's been a long day.
It has. So we've got an awesome guest today that
do.
we're actually getting some repeat guests coming back through, cycling back through the
Yeah.
podcast, which is cool. But first, if you're enjoying the podcast and you want to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, we are so grateful and appreciative for when people take the time to do that. So
Yeah.
just reminding you, if you're sitting, somewhere where you can stop, take a moment, scroll down on your phone, punch in those 5 stars, leave a nice comment, do it now.
This is the time.
This is the
We'll
moment.
wait.
This is your moment. Yes. This is us
This is us waiting.
We're very patient.
We are pretty patient. Okay, well, let's move on.
Yes. So anyhow, we have had, again, some great guests circling back through, and Cassie Parks, who is our guest today, is one of them. And you guys maybe remember Cassie came on a few years ago, and we talked about her Manifest $10,000 book. And she's really about the positive intention of creation in your life, you know, and really kind of aligning your actions with your thoughts and really harnessing the power of your mind to create the life that you want to live.
That's it.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
manifesting, like that term it gets thrown around a lot. So sometimes I feel like it loses, like, I don't know. Sometimes it loses like a little luster, but honestly, I mean, that really is what manifestation is, right? It's like aligning your actions with the life that you're trying to create and
Right.
like really putting into action what it is that exists inside of your heart and mind and what you really want to create in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like diet. It's just one of those words that gets used.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And people are like, oh, you're on a
On a
diet.
diet.
Oh, you're manifesting things.
You're
You're
right.
like, well, this is my diet. And yes, I'm
manifesting.
I'm manifesting stuff.
Master
Leave me
manifester.
alone.
Yeah.
I'm just going to manifest.
But the thing about Cassie, because it's like I had this urge to book her again, and I didn't really know why. It wasn't like there was some particular thing that I was like, oh, I really want to book Cassie for this particular subject or this kind of point of view. But I kind of just went with the whim, like, I don't know, I feel like it's just time to have her back on. And when we were having this conversation, I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I wanted her on, because she just has really good ideas about things.
Yeah.
She has really good answers,
Right.
and just really well thought out ways of being and thinking and kind of putting yourself in the way of your destiny. And
Yeah.
I just like, it's really the way that she talks about this stuff just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And she's got a really good laugh.
She does have a really good
Yeah,
laugh.
she's
Yeah.
a sweetheart.
She's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's just lovely. And it's like, why wouldn't we want to spend an hour talking to her? So we're really excited to have her. Before we get to that interview, remember B-Fest is coming up in just a few short months. So
It is.
if you have been peeking over the edge at our events and are curious what goes on, this is a great opportunity to get involved in the Be the Wellness events. We have them all over the world. So if you're here locally on the West Coast, it's a no-brainer because it's easy for you to get to. It's easy for you to just, hop into SFO. We've got lots of folks flying into that airport. We can connect you with ride shares and shuttles. And, there's a whole group kind of putting together their plan to get to and from the site. So, we really encourage folks out there to get in and start participating in the community in the live events.
Yeah, 100%. And you can do that by going to our Facebook page and joining the B-Fest event page.
Yes.
Go there, click the box that says you're going.
Yes.
Step one. and get involved and see what the people are doing. And it's a great way to get a feel for what's going to be happening there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also have a private Facebook group on Facebook now. So if you want to get in and just join in the general conversation on Facebook, that's in our private network, on our private page, not our actual business page, but a private group. You can request to be added there. And of course, we'll approve you and you can get in on the conversation that's going on in there. So lots of ways to get involved with us and lots of ways to start being a more active member of the community.
Indeed.
Yes.
And those ways are, to recap, 5-star review.
B-Fest.
Yes. B-Fest event page, and Be the Wellness private page.
Yes, exactly.
All the things.
So if we have not overwhelmed you with
Calls to action.
Calls to action. What do they say? Only ask for one call to action.
Yeah, they're all about one. But we like to give you guys multiple choices. You know what I mean? We're I don't know. We're like a equal opportunity. Not employer, but what is it? We're equal.
Call to action.
Call to actioner. Yeah, it's like just pick one and do it.
Exactly.
They're all great.
They're all great.
They all lead to amazing hair and like toned muscles or whatever it is you're looking for.
Sparkly smiles.
Sparkly
good hair,
smiles.
Happier lives.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to be welcoming Cassie back, and we hope you guys really enjoy this podcast.
Yeah, and without further ado, here's Cassie. And we are live. Welcome back to the podcast, Cassie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's so much fun to hang out with you guys.
Well, it's really fun for us too because, our podcast tends to kind of go all different directions. And we had you on episode number 70, which was probably a little over a year ago. And, it was great because manifestation and, sort of this a little bit more ethereal world is sort of on the outer rim of what we do. We're obviously, for the most part, health and fitness coaches, but I obviously think there's such a important component to how you think and how you sort of create your own reality. And so, having you come on is sort of a cool little bookend to one of the areas or like the ends of what we do of the spectrum. And I think it's such an important end because it kind of gets people thinking about really owning that they have the power to create in their lives. So first of all, I want to actually just ask you to kind of reintroduce yourself and maybe with that, talk about how you first realized that you had the power to manifest or create in your world.
Oh, I love this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Cassie Parks, champagne lover, master manifester. I teach people how to welcome more money into their lives. Author, coach, all of that fun stuff. But what I love this question because I love to get to talk about the first time I remember consciously manifesting something. And I was in 8th grade and somehow I knew, I think because I'm an athlete, so I was more drawn to visualization. Somehow I knew, I don't remember how I learned this other than like attracts like, but I knew things like that they did, studies where athletes would visualize and then they would get better and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I knew there was this power there. And I remember I was in 8th grade and there was this fundraiser. And the first day, if you sold 5 things, I think it was, you got entered into a drawing. And there were 5 $20 bills that were prizes. So I went and I sold the things and that was easy. And then I remember laying in my bed before I went to bed and I'm like, I'm going to visualize this. And so I visualized like my choir teacher calling my name, and walking down the stairs from like my assigned seat and getting the $20. And the next day it was the third name called. And it happened just like that. She said my name, totally. Walked down, got my $20. And so that's the first moment I knew. I didn't really harness those powers for a while after that, but that's my earliest memory of, okay, this is possible. I have some power and some control here, and this is fun.
I'm so glad you mentioned the athlete piece because, I was a gymnast, and this is a huge thing that gymnasts do in particular because, you have to actually visualize where in time and space you're going to twist, flip, open up, tuck, lay out, whatever you're going to do in these tumbling passes or on beam or what have you. You actually visualize it more often than the times you actually do the passes. And it will systematically increase your performance each time you go and do something again. So like, I always thought that like, it's interesting that you don't hear people talk about that kind of correlation more. Like this is actually very similar to what athletes do. They're actually picturing them creating something in the future that hasn't happened yet. And even though it's a physical manifestation, it's still a manifestation.
Absolutely. I love, because I had never thought about that in terms of gymnasts. Like I knew, they'll often like put electrodes on runners and like with the same muscles fire as when they're running a marathon. I always remember there's this quote, I don't remember the exact quote, but there's a quote from Michael Jordan that's like, in the huddle in that 30-second timeout when the game was on the line, I've already seen the shot. I've already seen myself make the shot something like 100 times by the time I actually physically have the ball in my hand.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's cool because especially for our audience, like it makes it relatable in a way, because I do think that this idea of like positive thinking, manifestation, you hear all these terms, but you're like, I can't drop a pin on what that means. I can't like grab at a thread to like really apply it to my life. And so it's like with anything, it's like visualizing the changes you're going to make in your diet or your workouts or, or the success you're going to have from those changes. Like, I think that those all fall into this pile, and it's like, it makes it more relatable, I think, for a larger audience.
Absolutely.
So tell me, okay, so this is one of the things so I was just telling you before we went live that I have a life mastery class called Authentic Self, and we just finished our manifestation week where we sort of focused on that concept and what it means and how to apply it in our lives. And one of the things that, I could feel people coming up, or there's a few things, but there's one that I want to tackle. And that's when people don't even have an idea of like what they want to manifest, or, they just feel like, I don't even know what that means or how to even start the process of that thinking. What do you say to people to kind of get them primed for this process at all?
Oh, I love this question. I would say like, what feels like something that would be fun if it happened? Right? Because I think, a lot of times it's like, well, I don't really want a new car, so there's no juice there, or it feels too big and like it would come with other responsibilities. So often it's like, if I don't know what I want, just start with like, well, what feels fun if it would happen and you got to experience that? And that can be like, I don't know, somebody bought me a cup of coffee, or I ran into my friend, or I get invited to, some cool fundraiser. It can be really anything. And that just puts it more in that playful space, which I think opens up to see more of what you want.
I totally love that. Yeah, that's such a great answer. And I think that people oftentimes feel like a little bit of pressure around that. Like, oh, I've got to, if I'm going to manifest something, I better do it right. Like, I don't want to mess this up and like, play my manifestation chips on the wrong thing.
So true. It's like, what if I ask for that? Like, but I don't want this, or I want it, but I don't want all the other stuff, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Absolutely.
There's got to be a piece of this too, where if people are, feeling out this idea of being able to, this is an oversimplification, but thinking things into existence, which isn't exactly what's going on, but like to some degree, you're like, okay, what do we really have going on here? And if they bite off something that's sort of too big right out the gate, it can feel like a failure, right? And then you're like, well, I knew this didn't work, or this isn't for me, or whatever the thing is. So if you can start with something that's relatively small, and I guess that's subjective, right? So everybody has kind of their own feelings on things. Like I would be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do something super, super small, see if I can, just have a good day tomorrow. And Vanessa's like, all right, I want a yacht.
This is so true. It's actually hilarious because whenever we have like a business meeting and someone's like, well, what are your goals? I'm like, I mean, I'd like to have like $1 billion company in a year.
I love it.
It's like, Adam's like, wow, okay. Not to burst your bubble or anything, but yeah, no, that's great. So the other thing I want to ask about is, and this is something else I hear and run into, is people are afraid to get too excited about something happening or visualizing it happening because they don't want to feel disappointed, right? So what do you say to the person who's like, well, I don't want to get my hopes up, or, I don't want to like think too positively or too, assuredly that this is going to happen because I'm just going to feel so disappointed if it doesn't.
Yeah. Great question. I have two things. And one ties into kind of what Adam just said, is like this starting small and starting with something that's low stakes, right? Can be one way to do this. So maybe it just is like a free cup of coffee, right? And so it's not going to rock your world if it doesn't happen, but it's a great place to play. And when it does happen, you can celebrate and it's super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. I totally get that. It's funny because we've recently done the Landmark Forum curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did some of this last year, and one of the things that they talk about is actually just asking for what you want.
Right.
It's like was like so simple, but kind of like mind blowing at the same time. It's like, if you want a free cup of coffee, like you're trying to manifest it, like you may even just ask for it.
Yeah.
It's so wild. And like half the time, if not more, the person or persons will just be like, okay, yeah, sure. I'll give you this free cup of coffee.
Right. Yeah. Because you asked. Yeah. It's so great. And we put all these things around, or I see people put things around asking, right? There's all these reasons they can't ask, or they ask for something that they think is going to get them there instead of just being like, yeah, this is what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do you get more empowered about knowing what you want and being comfortable with what you want?
I think being open and going really playful at it. And the thing I've been relating manifesting to lately, which ties into your podcast so well, is that, if you want to, let's say, strengthen your biceps, or you can go to the gym and you can do certain reps, and you might get somebody who knows a lot more if, there's different intricacies there, right? But you can go and you can spend an hour or however long is appropriate. I'm sure you shouldn't spend an hour on your biceps, but you can spend an hour doing that. Like the same as when I played softball, I could go do hitting reps and I could have a coach sit there and we do an hour of reps, and he'd, tell me, okay, turn this way this time, do this, focus on this, throw your hands harder, whatever it was, over and over again. And the thing that we have to remember about manifesting, thinking positive, all of these things, is that we have to practice it at different times. There's no place to go and like for an hour to just sort of, I guess maybe you could go think somewhere and tell somebody and they can like correct you. Right. Yeah. But the practice really happens more in life. Like it happens every time you do something. So, when it's opening to what you want, it's just realizing, okay, I'm going to look at life and I'm going to go through a couple days. I'm going to give myself a couple days and say, okay, what do I love? How can I notice what excites me, or what I find more fun, or what I'm happier doing? And just start to like make a list and take note. And it does take a little bit more time than something like maybe perfecting like hitting or shooting and basketball, where somebody can sit there and, you can have an hour of concentrated, like, let's make this better type of thing.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was just thinking like there's this sort of duality about manifestation. And part of that is on one hand, you are, focusing your attention on what it is that you want to create, and you are kind of, getting clear about that and obviously taking steps towards that. But then there's sort of this flip side where if you get too hyper focused and you think about nothing else than that, it seems to almost put like this weird pressure on the process, and then it almost seems like it backfires a little bit. Do you understand what I'm talking about when I say that?
Absolutely. I see this all the time is, it's like, but it has to happen tomorrow. I'm like, but, going back to your $1 billion company in a year, totally possible. And,
right.
we have to acknowledge the steps along the way to get there. Right. And that's the same thing with manifesting, is that when you do put that pressure, you're actually pushing it further away, because it's just, everything gets tight, which doesn't allow anything to flow from a very physical and energetic perspective. It becomes not fun. Like in the moment that it becomes not fun and that pressured, it's hard to manifest. So it can happen, but it's harder.
Mm-hmm. It's not like coals turning into diamond. The more pressure does not help.
Right.
Yeah. It's just cool, because I really do think that like this is where you hear terms like follow your bliss, or, it's like following your flow or flowing with things. It's like you have to have this kind of push and pull with it, where you set up these things that you want to work towards, but you don't get so constricted and so, that the process doesn't become so strict that you can't move, you can't flow. And I think that this is really where the confusion around it gets, because it's like you hear people saying like, well, focus your attention. And, if you just keep thinking positively and you focus, then you're going to create this thing. But it's like, it's this real energetic sort of push and pull. And so I think that's what, makes it a little confusing for people. They're like, well, which is it? Push or pull?
Right. What am I supposed to be doing right now?
Yeah. And so which is it?
So I like to, so I always have an intention. And so the first intention that I work with people on is manifesting $10,000, because it's big enough for your brain, and yet it's not so big that it's overwhelming. And 90 days, right? So, and this is, I'm going to answer the push and pull as part of this, is giving yourself some space and time, so you don't feel like you have to be pushing and pulling, right? So when you're doing something low stakes, and I'm just going to go back to coffee because we use that. Okay, I want a free cup of coffee this week, right? Just give yourself a couple days versus, okay, I want $10,000 this week. Tends to put a little bit more pressure on, I have to go do something. I have to do this. And part of the pull or the push comes from when people think, I have to go do all these things, or I don't know how it's going to happen, so I have to go figure it out. And all of those things push us further from that place of flow and just being in the moment and following the path, like you said. So I always come up with a goal. So it's either $10,000 or it's what I call the version of your future self. And that's my higher level thing. And for that, we use a vision of your life 5 years out, so that there's plenty of space, that you're not, doesn't mean that some of my clients don't expect it to happen tomorrow, but you're also leaving that space open that, okay, I can grow into this. I can be a millionaire in 5 years. I can allow myself that space. So that helps with that push and pull, because it depends. And I think it's different than it's a push and pull. It's how do you step into the beingness of whatever it is that you want? So how do you step into the beingness of being somebody who has $10,000 in their bank account, or who just manifested $10,000? And with that, kind of figuring out what should you do is, I teach people to look for the evidence, to really get excited when they see evidence that $10,000 is coming. To record, it's happening, like things that when it's actually like, oh, okay, I just got a random $100 today. Cool. That means it's happening. Like, yes, that's not the 10,000 yet, but it is happening. And that reassures our brain and kind of puts that, I've got to go do something. Like, should I push? Should I pull? Should I do this? Should I do that? Puts that at ease. So I like to put a lot of things at ease that make us not push or pull, but actually really be in that place where we are in the flow and we're not doing either.
So that could potentially be sort of a subjective measure of your reps, to go back to the hitting analogy that you were using earlier, where you're doing something that's quantifiable in the moment. This is one of the challenges with manifesting something, or at least aligning your brain to stop, stopping you from doing things. And so how do you know when you're being successful, right? So if I'm understanding you correctly, you can kind of, set these benchmarks obviously towards your goal and have that space and the time, and then be mindful of these things as they show up, and then be able to sort of recognize that this is part of it. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, what a coincidence. I wanted money and some showed up, but I don't know about this manifestation thing. Right. So this is one of the things we were, that's one good rep.
Yes.
Let's keep working.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, and one way that you can measure it and gives your brain that space to say, okay, there is something I can track. There's something I can become aware of. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. And it's, it's such a fun process, because I think that part of this manifestation idea is that it also comes back to like allowing your own creative essence to flow. And I think that sometimes people get stifled in what they ask for or what they try to quote unquote manifest, because they've actually almost lost a sense of playfulness or creativity. And so like, I think that's an important part of this, is like allowing yourself to wander out into this possibility of yourself that maybe you hadn't discovered yet. So I'm curious for you, like, do you help people like in their creative aspect, or like how to, wander to the corners of their mind or their heart to find these pieces of themselves that they want to create in the future?
Such a good question. I was like thinking about it as you're asking. I'm like, do I do that?
Do I do this?
So we do push that. And I would say I do that when I teach people how to script their life, which is writing or speaking your life as if it's already happened the way that you want. And so I teach them to go into this space where they can explore, to actually put themselves, okay, in this moment, now look around and tell me, like, what do you hear? What do you see? And let go enough to be like, okay, and then this happens and this happens. And often for my clients, as well as this has happened over and over again for myself, is that you'll see something like you weren't expecting or you didn't know, but you're like, oh yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. So in that sense, I do. Yeah.
That makes sense. So like there's these little things that show up, even though you might have known you want one little thing, there's like these little sort of byproducts that show up as a result of that.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I think that was, we talked a little bit before the show about writing fiction and how I'm stepping into that world. And I think that was a byproduct of like being in a space where I'm like, okay, what else is cool in my life? And it's like, oh, you write fiction. And having that space, that space that everything is awesome, to allow even more awesome stuff to come up.
So the space piece of this is really interesting to me, because I think we could all look back at our lives and go, oh, well, when I was in 8th grade, I wanted to be blah. And then that turned into this, which turned into this. It's just these like fractal decision making, situation. It's turtles all the way down looking back, And so I wonder if this sort of practice of having space in looking forward leaves some room for opportunity to present itself, that, and I think that, I think I can bring this back around here. My brain's moving a lot faster than my mouth. Talking about sort of goal setting, right? So we were discussing this idea of, okay, well, who are you going to be in 5 years, or what do we want that to look like? I mean, that in a sort of a type A personality world, that can look very specific, and it probably needs to look pretty specific initially, right? But I think if I'm capturing what you're saying, is we want this super specific goal, but then at every benchmark or along the way, or maybe along the way entirely, keep an eye on your peripheral vision, because there may be something that shows up there that is in the picture, but it's not what you pictured. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So, and you said it great. Like we get very specific about the whole life. So not just about the number, but okay, what does that look like? And I'm going to use the millionaire number just because I think it's fun. Like when I'm a millionaire and I make $1 million a year, like, okay, this is the this is what my house payment is. Okay, what does that house look like? This is what this looks like. What else is awesome in my life? And exactly like you said, as we fill in that, then we can also see that periphery, like, oh, okay, this is also happening because I have time for that. Because what often happens is there's something about saying, okay, I have $1 million that for some people implies like, okay, then I have time to breathe, really, right? And they can see that stuff on the periphery even more.
So you're looking through your house and you're like, what is that mandolin doing in the corner? That's right. I've become a professional mandolinist.
Yeah. Mandolinist.
Mandolinier.
Are you talking about the mandolin that you like slice carrots with?
Yes. I've gotten super into cooking. Wow, this is really taking a turn. I don't even like cooking, but in 5 years,
that mandolin of carrots. Okay. No, this is cool. So part of my Authentic Self program, we do what's called the Future Authoring Program. And it's literally like what you're saying, like really detailing out the things that you want to create in your future self. And I think that, one of the things about that even is that most of us don't actually ever take the time to very clearly and concisely think about what it is that we want to create. We think about, like, once in a while, something kind of crosses your mind and you think, oh, that might be nice. Or, it's like you have this sort of all these bubbles floating through your brain all the time about, possibility. But like you don't actually ever take the time to really detail it out. And I think that like what you're saying is so important for people to like really get minute about it. Like, what is it that I want to create? And like, what does it look like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What are the fine like details and what's the fine print of this life? And I think that that's something that's often overlooked.
Absolutely. And, people they get these glimpses of what they want, but often the default is like this checklist that everybody else has, right? It's like, okay, graduate college, check, get a good job, check, get promoted, check, get married, do this. But yeah, you're right. Like we miss those very important details. And I love that you said, like taste and smell and all of that, because that is one things that I take my clients through. Like, tell me what you're hearing. Like, let's get in touch with like, what is that? If a chef is preparing your amazing meal, like, what does it taste like? Like, what are the sounds? What do you smell? All of that.
Totally. So what about, this is the thing that I would love to get your opinion on. And that's where people have some success, right? Like maybe they start small and they manifest a few wins and then they go for something a little bit bigger. Maybe the stakes are a little bit higher. They start, kind of making moves towards something that, takes a little bit more energy or time. And suddenly, it doesn't end the way they wanted it to, or maybe, didn't quite work out as they anticipated. And, suddenly they're feeling like, oh, I don't know, man, I'm just going to go back into the safety zone with this whole thing. I'm just going to know what works. And I'm just going to stick with like the very, rudimentary things that I know will get me these results. Like, I'm just going to work harder. I'm not going to, like, manifestation doesn't have a place in this game anymore. Like, what do you say to those people who maybe get like a little bit nervous and default back to their old settings?
My first is like, if that really is you and you do want that thing, like, get somebody who can help you get it, as always, because so often every time you do that, because what I've found with anybody who does that, and I love that you said work harder, because that can mean like, go like grind harder, but there's also this manifestation work harder, right? So a lot of my clients, when they come to me, they're what I call their law of attraction to-do list is like pages long, because when something doesn't work, they perceive it to not work. They go back and they read another book and they get 5 more techniques and they add those on to the other techniques. And before you know it, like there's 100 things they think they should be doing every day to manifest something, which is also as miserable as going back and working hard, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and totally, so I always encourage people to get some help. Is the first thing I always say, like, get some help, because every time what I've found is that if you're called to this, you'll end up back into it. And a lot of my clients have been in this situation where they're like, okay, I make some traction, but then I fall off and I make some traction. And so what you're actually doing is creating that sort of that, I fail at this story. So if this is really, I always say, like, get somebody or get into a program that can support you, whether it's like learning manifestation through your authentic self course, or it's some other coach or whoever it is, like getting support is one of the best things I can say. But the other is that this is a normal part of the process. So for me, what I've learned, and I do this with my co-host on Manifest It Now, we've been fleshing this out, but there are levels of manifesting. So there's like this where you realize you have this power and it's awesome. And then there's that where you're like, okay, I can get a little bit more stuff. And then there's often this place where you get to where exactly what you're saying is like, it's not coming true. It's not coming true. And what's mostly going on there that I've seen is that it requires a new level of beingness. Like it requires you to step in. It's not just about thinking anymore. It's really about this overall, who am I being? And when that changes, then those things come along with it. But often when people get to that point where they're not successful, it's because they just don't know how to step into the being of that next level of manifesting.
All right. So that actually brings me to segue perfectly into something. I had a question floating around in my brain, but I couldn't quite bring it together to sort of solidify it. And you just kind of helped me with that.
Awesome. I love it.
Way to manifest it.
Yay. But it's this idea, because we talk a lot about manifesting things. And in this world, the manifestation almost invariably is some sort of material thing, whether it's like material goods or, a new house or a lifestyle that is often, based on material things. I want to go these places and do these things, and I want to wear these shoes when I'm doing it. And so what I'm wondering is if you see some sort of a crossover, or if you ever have people come to you as coaching clients that are like, you know what, I'm not super concerned about the stuff. I want to manifest contentment, or I want to manifest this way of being that's just like good to go in the world. And I'm not super concerned about all of the trappings of that. Is that something you've come across?
I think there are coaches who people come across for that. Like for me, we often go to solve a problem. Like, so for me, people often come because they want more money, because they think that's the answer. Like it's going to get them the contentment. They don't yet know that they want that contentment. And I had a client, she said this the other day, it was so great. And it's exactly what you said. It's something like, she goes, I came for the money, but this way of living is so much better. And so she she crossed it on her own, but I had to give her the path and show her all about the money and show her she could do this and that. And then all of a sudden it did become about the way that you're living. So I think some very evolved people can come from that. It's not typical in my world, but I think it does happen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually, we see a very similar thing in the strength and conditioning world, or in the diet and fat loss world specifically, where people are like, oh, I want to lose 15 pounds. If I lose 15 pounds, that's all I want you to do is help me lose 15 pounds. We're like, okay, come on in, and then about a week later, they're like, oh, actually, let's see. So there's a lot involved in this, and pretty soon they're not super concerned about the 15 pounds. Yeah. And they're living a completely different life, and the 15 pounds just comes naturally as part of this different idea. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of, we were talking about this, actually, we were doing a hike for our Peru trek with some clients the other day. And one of our clients mentioned, our client Jamie mentioned this quote from Jim Carrey, which was, something to do with like, money doesn't solve everything, but he wishes everyone could get it so they could learn for themselves. Right. Basically like you have to, but like, it's important to get it so you can learn that, so that you could step past that lesson into what's really there.
Right. Yeah, because it is one of those things. Every time somebody says that, they're like, well, money won't buy you happiness. I'm like, I want to try. There's like, just give me a shot. I'm pretty good at being happy with money. Like, I think maybe nobody else is doing it right. Like, I could probably do this myself. And no matter how sort of into that, I don't know, whatever the word is, no matter how sort of, far past that concept you can see, there's always that little gremlin in the back of your mind that's like, yeah, but dude, like so many of these things you're worried about would just go away if you had the money. Like, give me a shot. Give me a shot.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that, because I think that's the thing, is that when it's the worry, it feels like as soon as that worry goes away, everything would be better. But then when you find out, it's like, okay, but then we're going to fill that space with, and that's what you feel with that amazing contentment, being happy and all these other things. But yeah, it is. It's like, I totally get it. I love that quote always whenever I hear like, yeah, but let me be the person who tries.
Yeah.
So you just kind of glazed over something right here, or glossed over something that I personally think is very, very important. And that is filling this void that's going to be created by the reduction in thoughts, or whether it's stress or just rumination or something that you're grinding on constantly. If you solve a problem, there's going to be a void, and you better be prepared to fill that void with something more positive in your life. And we see that in a lot of places, but I think that that's an incredibly important message to get across, is like we are problem solvers and problem creators. And if when we solve one, and leave that void, then gosh, how much better would your life be if you were the one that chose what problem filled that void?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is why the giving back piece is so important, because ultimately, like, if we really do this work and we create our magical lives and manifest what it is that we want to create, at some point, hopefully, you come to a place where you're like, okay, there's a certain amount of abundance in my life. And there may become this place where it's like, there is actually a little less stress to like drive towards the creation of money or the creation of wealth or whatever, because you've been doing it for a long time and you've finally accumulated, some sort of, money or a certain sense of security in your life. And I think that, like you're saying, when that void is created of like having to dig deep and create the financial piece, there is that space. And I think that's where people really can benefit from giving back, like paying that forward, because there is that space now and you're going to fill it with something. So instead of creating more worry for yourself, how about create sharing and giving and, helping others to get there as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that you're doing this new project and you're writing, and I just I want to touch on that, because I think the other part of this is that people think that they start out a certain direction manifesting, and they think that the way things are going to come to them might be through the way that they can see it. So, for instance, you're a coach, and so you're coaching people on this, and it'd be really easy to think, well, I'm going to manifest, my dreams and my finances and all my things through my coaching. But it's actually this mindset that you've created around this coaching and this way of being that gave you an opportunity to create success in another way. So I'd love to just hear about that process for you of like changing gears and opening up yourself to like actually creating abundance in a whole new realm.
I love that. I've coached, and I actually, even created, even before coaching, like I created my, my financial freedom in real estate. Like I could pay my bills and leave my work to go be a coach. And so as I continued to step in and grow as a coach, I was in Italy, in Tuscany, in this amazing villa, it's infinity pool. You could see the Mediterranean, and it just sort of hit me. And I think this goes back to the space. Like often it's not just about what are we going to fill the space? It's about being willing to have space, like let there be space too, as well as what are we going to fill it with? And so I think there had been enough space, like things were going really well in my business. I'd left my job and then I built a business, and then there was space to see like what I think I say this to my clients. Most of my clients have a secret dream, just like I did. So it was a secret, and it wasn't because I kept that dream from anyone. It was because I didn't even remember. There wasn't time in my life to remember. Once upon a time, I did have this dream that I wanted to be a fiction author, not, and obviously I'm a nonfiction author, and that was cool and awesome as well too. Like I did want to write books. But it popped up in this pool in Italy, like, I want to write a fiction book, and here's the story. And it was in my head. And so I think having that space that we're talking about that's not filled with worry, that you really feel with feeling good and being able to just be in a moment where you can just feel good and not have to fill it with anything, and learning to live without that worry and that wondering and all of that stuff really opens up this space to whatever. Like for me, it's fiction. And I always say, I got to follow that path because I'm the leader of like this movement and what happens, in terms of my people and what I teach. And I don't think I could not follow it because it's so much fun. But so I started writing fiction, and I love it. My fiction book outsells all 6 of my other nonfiction books.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, that really is just like, that's it, because it's really cool, because it's like, honestly, what you've done is you've built a framework that you can kind of copy and paste into other sections of your life. So it's like you've realized something that works for creating one thing is the same thing that works for creating something else, and just to give yourself that space to allow for that next creation. I really love that. And I think that, like, I hope that resonates with folks out there, because I do think so many times we're so busy and we're so, scattered and so focused on what it is that we need to do rather than what we want to do, that we often don't have that ability to just kind of zoom out and breathe and see what comes up for us.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that keeps people from even like solving that first problem, like we were talking about a little bit a while ago, is like they don't know what they're going to do with that space. It's like, well, will I be bored if I don't have to worry about that or this? And what I always say is there's always going to be something amazing coming along. Like when you create the space, something cool is going to come along.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and boredom, I think, is something that we tend to shy away from. But I read an article recently, and I've since looked for it and can't find it. It's one of those like disappearing articles. Or maybe I dreamed it. I don't know. But there was something about in this article they were talking about boredom sort of being a necessity. It's part of how our brains have evolved and how creativity has evolved. And if we're constantly filling every moment of our day with tasks, whether they're menial or just like habitual, there's never going to be the drive to create something new, because there's no boredom. Like boredom's a pressure that creates something, and I thought about that as kind of an interesting way of sort of looking at that.
I love it.
Yeah. I have another question, and now it's gone.
Yeah, I love that. And it is true. I think it's that boredom and that just being in that space that it opens up so much for creativity and doing something creative.
Yeah, I think, and we see like there's almost a war on creativity these days, because there is so much outside stimulus from social media and our phones. And, whenever there's like an inkling that we might be bored, we're instantly going to Facebook, going to Instagram, going to our social media platforms. And Adam's got his question back. So.
I remember.
Yes.
So, okay. So So this goes to this idea that you were talking about earlier about this sort of being in flow, for lack of a better term, in this state where things are just kind of moving. And I know flow gets the term has been used in a lot of ways, but I think the way that we're discussing it here is that sweet spot between push and pull, where it's directed. It's a directed allowingness. You're just kind of letting it happen, but it's what you want to happen. And I'm wondering if you noticed a difference in the sort of the feeling of that flow when you started writing your fiction, like as opposed to writing nonfiction. I mean, they're two very similar paths, right? They're very parallel in like the physicalness of them and the preparation and all that. And so I'm just wondering if one felt dramatically easier or like more right somehow.
I love this question. So I happen to be one of those writers. I'm just going to start here because I think it's only fair to give the full story. Like when I write nonfiction, I do it in 3 days. I make the decision and I just sit down and I write. And it still has to be edited and all that. But the majority of the book is done within 2 to 3 days and, less than 18 hours of writing. And that's just sort of after my first book, that's just the way I did it. That was the way they were teaching. And I'm like, let me try this. And it was just so much better for me. So that, it's different. Like, yeah, I can sit down and it's still easy for me, right? It's not like grinding, or it doesn't feel hard when I do it that way. It feels really easy. But fiction, there is more of, like a step back and sort of like trust the story. And this is some things I learned from performing improv and taking improv is I learned about fiction writing really in that, like making a choice and trusting that that's the right choice. And then seeing, I don't know, maybe 30 pages later, like why you made that choice and why that makes sense. So I find the way to get in the flow no matter where I am. And I think I mastered that over the years of, I work when it feels really good. Like when I write a program, if it feels like I'm pushing, I just step back and I stop and go do something else versus, pushing for 5 hours and still not having anything on the page. I'd rather go play for 5 hours. So yeah, it is different. And I think, but in a lot of ways for me, it's similar because that's just the way I live my life now, is really in this flow. And if it feels good, I dive in. And if it doesn't, I give myself permission to step back and do something that feels better and then still come back to it and trust that I can meet whatever the deadlines are that I've set for myself.
So I'm just curious because I'm hearing that description of being in flow and like giving yourself permission to ebb and flow with what's naturally there. And I'm picturing someone out there that's like, yeah, well, I have to go to work every day from 8 to 5 and I can't really just like ebb and flow if I feel like it. So like, how do you, and I think I think we're starting to actually experience that with our business. We're going into our 4th year of this sort of in the structure that it's in now, and there's starting to be these glimpses of like ebb and flow, whereas before it was like, no, you just got to grind, you've got to put in 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for, you don't get to like say, oh, I don't feel like you have to grind. So like, I guess what I'm wondering is, how do we speak to people who are still in that grind part about how to create flow within the grind almost?
So I'd see if the grind still feels good. Like, because, I'm analytical as well as really into this manifestation and stuff. I'm like a data person. I love data. Like my friends will tell you, like, if there's a way to tell a better story with the numbers, I'll do it. And so I would, and this is what I would have done had it occurred to me. Like if I was coaching me in the past, I would have had me sit down and put numbers. Like, is the grind getting what I want? So when I go and I force myself to work for 2 hours, let's say, on something, because this is what I did until I figured out it wasn't working for me. When I was trying to leave my job, I was trying to build my coaching business. I was grinding. I was giving up everything in my life because I worked 60 hours a week. So any other time really went to trying to grow my business and to make a business so I could leave my job. And it's when I decided not to do that financial freedom flowed in and I was able to quit my job within a year and a half. And all the things changed for me. So what I would do is I'd have myself actually keep track. Like, okay, so you forced yourself, when you got home at 6 o'clock, you ate, and then from 6:30 to 8:30, like you tried to work. Like, and I would say like data point, what did you get done? How awesome was it? And then I would say, okay, like the next day, like just pick one thing you're going to do, see how long it takes, and just sort of start to compare the data of, is it effective? Because I do think for some people, like grinding feels good and is good for them, and it works, right? For me, I just it never worked for me.
Yeah.
Like it literally, like when I look back at the data, it just made things harder for me. But I think if I would have understood and really looked at it from a data perspective, like, okay, how much did you get done in that 2 hours? Like, and then if I had only given myself a half hour the next day and realized, oh, you could have written the same article in a half hour that took you 2 hours, then I could have started to sort of unwind that need to grind. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. So like, I definitely have a proclivity towards the grind, and I'm actually just learning. I mean, I could say honestly, and it's just because I had such a hard work equals success. Like it's so ground into the fiber of my being that it feels like I absolutely can't have success without that grind. And I'm definitely reversing that because I actually think that I just put a bunch of things in the way that don't need to be done just to create more grind. So I could be like, wow, I've worked so hard. I must deserve to be successful now.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting thing. I worked so hard, so I deserve to be successful. That's a trip, because but that is, I think, what happens a lot of times. You're like, wait a second. I read this book in an entrepreneurial book that said I worked 17-hour days for the first 4 years. So I'm like, all right, I'm 3 years in. For the first year, I only worked 14-hour days, so that's 3 additional hours every day I've got to do. Like, what am I going to do with all of this time? Or what am I going to do to fill all this time? I know.
Right? Yeah. I know. And then, and that was ingrained in me. Like, I 100% get where you're coming from, because, my dad was he was successful and money flowed in, but it was like he worked all the time. Now, as I've grown up and I really can like step back and see the action, like he loved it. Like he really that's what he loved, but I didn't get that at that time. I was just like, oh my God, he's working so much. Like I can't do that. I can't work that hard, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And it's funny. One of the things that's helped me, which is just kind of interesting, is like this idea of flow, like just allowing there to be more flow. And, everything has become so much less pressurized. I don't have huge expectations about everything anymore. I just literally, I even
Except
physically,
for that $1 million business. And $1 billion or whatever.
some big goals.
Except you want to be Apple by March.
But exactly. But I'm just not attached if it happens or not.
Right.
No, but I think even physically, just getting up and moving your body and just being more fluid and flowing with things and just going outside and walking and just allowing that flow to be more the integral piece of everything. It really has helped me kind of let go of the rigidity of what it has to look like.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. I'm celebrating that with you.
Yeah. And I'm not allowing those words of "why are you so lazy" to affect me, which is that internal voice that's like, you should be doing more. I'm like, shut up, voice. I'm taking a nap.
Yeah, it's nap time. Nap time, voice. So to touch back in on the writing stuff, because I think writing is such an interesting endeavor, because I really think that it takes a lot of faculties. You have to be creative, but then you also have to be super organized, and you know what I mean, in order to have things flow from wherever they do inside through your fingertips and onto either a page or a screen or however that works. There's a lot of processes in there. And have you ever read Pressfield's War of Art?
But I'll write it down.
Stephen Pressfield's book. It's a great book. Yeah, it's a quick read. It's a great book. And he, Stephen Pressfield's obviously a fiction writer, and he wrote this book just about his process and the war of art. And his idea is it's his own internal war against the resistance to allowing what's in him to flow out onto the page. It's specific to writing, but it's a metaphor for life. It's all over the place in kind of how this resistance shows up. And so I'm wondering if you have a process. You were talking about, just deciding, okay, I'm going to write this book and sitting down and banging it out in 3 days. What leads up to that? How do you know when it's time for your 3 days?
So for me, I was in a program. My mentor was, she was also a book writing coach, which is how I got connected to her. And so just every time there was I was like, okay, I need to write about this. I need to write about this. It showed up. So for me, there was a process to get in touch with who you were writing to and get the chapter outline. And she had a lot of processes for your brain as well, which if anyone's interested, you can look up the Difference process on Amazon. I think it's called The Difference. But it tells you that, and it tells you how to look at the chapter and decide, okay, this is going to be a 4,000 word chapter or a 2,000 word chapter. And you decide ahead of time for your brain. And so I did all of those things, which is really tied into what I teach, right? Getting super clear about where you're going before you go there. So it would literally just be the writing. Everything else would be done before. So I knew exactly what chapters. I knew how long they were going to be so that I could just tell my brain, okay, we're writing 4,000 words on this. When I'm in the flow, I write about 1,500 words an hour, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. And so I could just sit down and go. And the same is true for fiction. So I, as a fiction writer, I actually outline the whole, like the chapter, like basically like, this is what's going to happen, how I want what I want the reader to know at the end, and how I want them to feel at the end of each chapter. And then do the same thing. Like, I think this is going to be, 2 pages, which is about 500 words. And this is going to be, 2,000 words. And this is going to be 1,000, and put that to it, and then sit down and let it flow. So I think putting up, for me, like getting really clear in the beginning versus just sitting, like I'll make this clear. I never sit down and just go, okay, I'm going to write the book today. There has been prep before. Like I've made sure I know where I'm going. But then when I sit down, then it flows.
So I have, I know we're coming up on our time, but I have this one other piece that I want to touch on before we wrap up. And that is resistance in general. And Adam was just mentioning resistance, but like something that I see is that people want a result, but they have all of this resistance between them and the result. And part of that resistance is they have a lot of really good reasons why they can't get to that result. And so, and I mean, it's almost like, it's one thing if you have someone who really wants something and they're willing to do whatever it takes and they're like, I don't care, I'm full speed ahead. But the more difficult or sort of nuanced thing that it's hard to create with people is when they want the result, but they have so much resistance in terms of the reasons they give themselves why they can't get there. And that's what I'm wondering. How do you help people work through their own very intelligently designed resistance?
It is, because we are smart beings with smart brains that can create a lot of things that often aren't supportive of us. So the first thing I'll say is that I still come up against this, but I just know it, and I move through it in a very similar way that I'll answer the question is. So first and foremost, I think that understanding resistance is natural in a lot of ways. So our brains are built to keep us safe. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm afraid of success. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of this. I think that mostly the truth is we're afraid of the unknown, because our brain can't prepare us for that. And so when we're going to, like, let's say, become a fiction writer, our brain doesn't know, well, what does our life look like as a fiction writer, right? And so it's a very natural thing to have some resistance to that, because it's unknown. And our brain's like, this might not be safe, right? Like, it seems crazy to us. Like, obviously that's safe, but our brain doesn't know that. And so first of all, understanding that that's just part of it. And then that we get to choose whether we want to do that. And so often when the stories come up, I will say, like, or the reasons, I'll be like, I ask my clients, like, is this the story you want to keep being true? Like, do you want this story to be true tomorrow? Are you ready to write a different story? Right. Are you ready to do it? And so then we can move through it. Sometimes it's just a matter of actually sitting with the feeling of that fear and feeling it. We've talked a lot about being busy and things like that. And what I've seen in my work over and over again is that keeps us from feeling. So if we're in our heads, often we're not feeling. And so sometimes it's just a matter of actually letting your body, your mind, your spirit feel that fear, and then you can move on. But I do check into the stories of, like, okay, that's cool that you're telling yourself that. Like, do you want it to be true? Because we have the power to decide in any moment, like, well, this might happen, that might, cool. Is that the story you want to tell? Like, and I'm cool either way when it's my client. You can,
yeah.
If you want to hold on to it a little longer, like, that's okay. But let's be clear that that's what's happening. Yeah. And
right.
Oh no, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say that our brain's evolution, or our bodies or our beings, whatever evolution to protect ourselves is so just fraught with difficulty in a world where there aren't that many things that we have to actually protect ourselves from.
Right.
It's like that lizard brain is working. It's like, oh man, what about this? Oh yeah, I don't know. This is new. I don't know. Are you sure this is new? This could be catastrophic. And you're like, God, we don't have that far to fall. Like when it was can you make it to that other branch? It's like, that's a pretty big swing. Do you think you can make it? Like, that was a real question, these ideas of, do I give up one incredibly successful career to like do another one? And you're like, come on, this is at the end of the day, there's no alligators down there. Like, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think that's, as a coach, like, that's the thing that I wish if I had a magic wand and I could remove resistance, it would be like the best thing ever, right? Because you're always trying to help people recognize their resistance as such, but the reasons they come up with are so good. Mm-hmm. They're like, no, like, I do have to feed my family. I'm like, I know you have to feed your family. Like, I get it. It's real. Like, it's so real. But like, can we just put that aside for a moment? Like, what's behind that? Like, so it's just tricky. I feel like that if you can master helping people overcome their resistance as a coach, then like, that's the most masterful skill. And that's one that I'm really working on.
It's what's needed, right? And it's a lot of times we don't see it. I had a conversation with a client earlier and she's like, no, it's this way. I'm like, you don't have to agree with me, but I don't think that's right. Like, that's not coming from your future self. And she's like, yeah, but this and this and this. I'm like, okay, well, as long as you want, like, you can have it. And then she's like, you're right. Yeah, I'll totally give it to you.
I'll give it to you
until you're ready.
Yeah, totally. It takes such a sense of, grace and love to like be able to massage that with people, right? Because I think there's some parts of as a coach where you're just like, no, stop it. I'm done with you being that way. But it's like, nope, I don't get to be done with you being that way because you're still that way. You're still there. And that's just like, okay, I'm going to wait for you. I'll wait for you as long as it takes. No, this is awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cassie. As always, I love just hearing your insights. And, obviously we work in this world, a similar world as you, but you always have just such a way of looking at it, thinking about it, and looking about it. That's so refreshing and really just gives so many little nuggets of wisdom. So thank you so much for all that you guys do for having me. It's today.
Always like one of my favorite interviews and best conversations. So thank you. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
CassieParks.com, CassieParks.com is the easiest way. And you can find the books on Amazon if you want, under the same name. But CassieParks.com has links to everything.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
I do. So I host the More Money podcast where we talk about people getting more money, sharing stories actually and about people who've overcome resistance in their whole journey. And then also Manifest It Now, where we talk everything law of attraction with one of my girlfriends.
Awesome.
That's cool. Super cool. So I want to close this off with a quote that I think kind of talks a little bit about what we're doing. So in one of our programs, we ask our clients like, hey, what's your favorite inspirational quote of the day or whatever, just to, get, well, we learn a lot from doing that. And Kev Will, which is one of our guys, has been with us going on 4 years now, always really comes up with something good. And he has one today that says, I've learned the hard way that to have any kind of a future, you've got to give up hope of ever changing your past. And I was like, you know what?
So good.
This is so on point because exactly what we were just talking about is this is what it is. These hanging on to these stories is fundamentally your past. And if you can't let go of that and get rid of it, there's just no hope for your future. Well, not no hope, but, limited. It's hopeless.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's perfect.
That's cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cassie. And hopefully we will see you again soon in the future. I like to have you on every once in a while just to keep the manifest juices going.
I love it. Thank you all for having me back.
Okay.
Right,
take care.
We'll see you soon.
All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as we did.
Yes, we do hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, if you did, this is a really great time to remind you that strong glutes
yes,
are important.
They are. Strong glutes will get you through an hour and a half podcast if you're driving.
Exactly.
It's no joke.
It's
folks.
actually true. Yeah.
Yeah. Squeeze whilst driving.
Squeeze those cheeks. And yes, we are all about the glute training here at Be the Wellness, and our Build a Better Booty program kicks off tomorrow. So if you missed the last go around, remember this only runs we do it about every 14 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So make sure that you get in and check it out. We just did that Peru hike, and I'm telling you that I was so grateful I had been doing this glute programming for the last, basically since we kicked it off. I've been doing it consistently. So
24 weeks.
Yeah, 24 weeks of glute training. And so that runs in 12-week increments. And I'm telling you, the strength and endurance and just the sense of being strong in my movements and having tons of power output on those hikes was incredible. And you don't really correlate glute training to things like hiking, but it makes a huge difference.
That's everything.
Because your glutes are your driving force of most all of your movement.
Yeah.
Right?
Certainly,
besides fist pumping. I just why I didn't say all of your movement, because there's definitely moves you can do.
There's definitely non-glute specific movements.
There is, yeah.
Well, but but here's the thing though with the glute training is that it's not even though any hip extension, right? Anything happening in your lower body is going to be dependent on the glute. The thing about glute training though is that just because your glutes are involved doesn't mean that you're recruiting them that well.
Totally.
Some people will say, well, you're not recruiting them at all. Like that's not true, but you may not be recruiting them as efficiently and well and in the appropriate timing for the right motor control of your hip.
Yep.
And that is a huge piece of this glute training is just frankly using them and getting them to fire correctly and getting everything working right. And it can be a game changer.
It's a game changer. Yeah. I honestly, and the folks who'd done the glute programming going into Peru, every single one of them said to me, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I've been doing the glute programming. And it was unexpected to me how much I noticed it made a difference.
Right.
I really didn't think that it would make that big of a difference in my movement patterns and how quickly I tired or not. And I'm telling you, it was absolutely a game changer how much more power I had and how much more stability I had in my movements. I didn't get tired and start taking on some strange stride and, front loading my knee and doing all this weird funky stuff that happens when you just aren't activating well. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
really
it
cool.
works.
Yeah.
And then the way we do it is because the glute training is lower body specific in this program. So then we concurrently will run a handstand challenge.
Yep.
And then a pull-up challenge.
Exactly.
So you can get some upper body jam in there, and that's available as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pull-up challenge actually kicks off tomorrow as well. So you can do those together, and then the pull-up challenge will end, and the
handstand challenge will start, and the booties challenge will still be going.
Yep, you got it. So get in there and check it out, guys, because I'm telling you, the booty program's what's up. All this stuff is it's really a game changer. It protects your lower back, your knees. It just is such a great way to get your whole body online.
Right. And it's all the rage on Instagram. So if you're Instagrammy and you want pictures doing glute training, this is what's up.
And you can hashtag build a better booty.
Yeah. All you need is a phone. And
all
an
you need is a
Instagram
phone,
account.
and you can be an Instagram model just like that in 12 weeks.
Yep. That is our not promise to you.
Yes. We don't promise anything.
Promise anything.
That's what our guides kept saying in Peru. We don't promise anything. But anyhow, we really recommend you guys check this out. And another thing is, if you do the program, take before pictures, because actually you will notice a change. I don't know if you're actually looking to get a bigger butt or a rounder butt or whatever, but take a look and take before and after pictures, because you'll actually notice it may not even just be that your butt gets bigger, but like your stomach will pull in, the shape of your legs will change. Like a lot of things will shift that are really aesthetically nice as well.
Totally.
Yep.
So that's what's up.
So we hope you guys have a great week and hope to see you in those programs, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.